Hey there, good morning. This is Leanne with Markigy. Today I'm joined by John Moran, and he works in so many wonderful ways. And he has about 20 years of experience in the landscape. And I'm going to let you do a better job of introducing yourself. So, John, kind of give us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to and your insights.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, Leanne, thanks so much for having me. I am honored to be on the podcast with you, and congratulations on this milestone episode that is going on today. So, a little bit about me and what I do. I work at a data management, analytics, and MarTech company by the name of SAS. SAS has been around for a number of years, and while they are most commonly known for providing kind of that base analytics platform, we do have a line of solutions that sit on top of that analytical platform. So I'm responsible for a lot of the marketing work of our what we call our SaaS customer intelligence line, which is our MarTech platform. We also have an ad tech component to it as well. So in my role, I do a lot of speaking, presenting, writing, positioning work, and I love to talk about all things MarTech. So when I met you, and you were telling me a little bit about the podcast, I was very interested and excited to join you. So thanks again for having me on. Looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I know that you have some like really deep expertise and I think we're really aligned on today's topic of the ethical use of modern MarTech because it has evolved in the past 5 years, 2 years, 5 weeks. It's
Hmm.
always like evolving and it's getting faster than ever. Not to sound like one of those fluff pieces in today's ever changing world. We know that it's changing, but we do need to be guardians of the data and the way that we use it as marketers. And so this was something that we both felt kind of passionately about. Kind of tell me if you were gonna get like on a soapbox and you're gonna be like, look, this is the way to do it. What
Yeah.
what what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think that we are seeing in society, in technology and culture, really at a global scale, we're seeing that there is a lot of distrust that exists. Right, there's a lot of of a lack or a void of creating these trusted relationships and trusted bonds, not only between brand and consumer, but between a lot of entities, right? And without trust, you really have nothing, right? We know and we've seen based on research that about 6 in 10 consumers don't trust the brands that they interact with, and we know that about 9 in 10 consumers, I think the actual number is about 87% of all consumers, will actively avoid interacting with a brand if they do not trust it, right? The only kind of exception to that is when they don't have any other choice, right? Perhaps it's the only brand that sells the product or the service that they need. That being said, we dive further into well, what are the causes of all of this distrust, right? Well, when you don't have a solid relationship, you obviously can't create trust, right? So, when you're not using data properly, when you're not using technologies properly, when you're not, addressing and responding quickly to service or support concerns, or whether you're just sending offers that are irrelevant and missing the mark. I think all of those things lead to consumers today really going down the path of, this brand doesn't get me, they don't understand me, I don't want to interact with them. I don't care if they have a great product or have the best price. Customer experience for me is more important than those things, and we're seeing that. And so I think that one of the things that's often neglected is the data component, right? And data is becoming more and more important, right? So being a guardian or a steward of data, technology, and organizational resources is really important. So one of the things that we talk about at SAS is this concept of performing responsible engagement, right? So engaging with your consumer, if you're a brand, in a responsible manner, responsibly using their data, responsibly using technology, both existing and emerging technology. So yes, generative AI is included in that, and responsibly using organizational resources. Right? If consumers know that brands are blowing budgets and money on frivolous things that just don't make sense, that's a turnoff, right? And with so many consumers being socially and culturally aware, they want to know that brands are doing right by a variety of different kind of components of society. So looking at kind of those three pillars, right? The responsible use of data, responsible use of technology, the responsible use of resources is something that's so important now that I think brands should certainly consider as all of these changes are happening around us.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a couple key points of what you said that I just want to call out is that the distrust is because of how other brands have behaved, right? So, especially like business continuity. If you're doing frivolous spending or you're having lots of layoffs, are you going to be able to deliver the thing that you promised on being able to deliver? You
Right.
know, and how does that impact if you're, especially in your space, if you're a data company, and that's where, my lifeblood is coming from, and you're doing frivolous spending or you had a lot of layoffs, like, what's going to happen if you implode? Not all companies last forever. And I think that, the hesitancy is very real. And when looking at vendor checklists, that's often a question, is like, how stable are they? What's the 10K say? What's the, what are the reports, like, is there pending litigation? All these things matter quite a bit. um and the second part that I really liked was the interchangeability of steward and guardian, because it's more than just like being a bulldog, be like, no, it's being that host, almost, that,
Mhm.
yes, this is how we do it, and this is what you can expect. And it's just a further step of it. um any thoughts on anything that I called out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that exactly what you're saying is spot on, right? We're seeing that, with a lot of these new regulations that are coming online, right? GDPR, not that new, but Digital Markets Act and CCPA and all of these other compliance, data compliance and regulation guidelines that are being set out. We're seeing that if you're a big tech company, and we've already seen some of the biggest tech companies out there become offenders. When you're applying, fines like 4 to 10% of total turnover or revenue to breaking one of these compliance laws, that results in billions of dollars for them. But if you're a smaller company, it's still going to be large, right? That's still going to be millions, if not, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there's a cost to being irresponsible, right? There's both a tangible financial cost, but there's also those intangibles, right? Of that distrust and the consumer sentiment and that sort of thing. So I think that demonstrating that you're a guardian or steward of how you use data, how you use technology, and how you're using your marketing and operating budgets is you know being transparent with that and communicating that out, in my mind, is a benefit, right? It's something that brands should want to do instead of letting the consumer assume, right? Because we know that with the void of clear communication, you know people often assume the worst, right? So they're, well, this big tech company isn't telling me how they're using my data. So I can only assume that they're probably selling it. And that's why I'm being contacted by this other company with data that looks very similar to the data that this big tech provider would have had about me, right? So I think there's benefit into actively communicating that you are a steward or guardian of data technology and the resources that you have.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that there was something in there that you mentioned about brands should want to. And I think that that is really where an organization's starting point needs to be when they're looking at how they execute on their behaviors, as far as like communications, protecting data, all these things. They should want to do the most compliant way, or even foreshadowing, future compliance concerns. Because once you're behind in compliance or in the customer's best interest or being that guardian or steward, like once you're behind, like that can be really hard to like turn the boat. It's hard to the phrase is usually like turning the Titanic, right? It's hard to
Hmm.
change directions, but when you have that culture of, hey, CCPA only applies to people in California, but it's the right thing to do. So we're going to do this domestically and internationally. Or the EU has these rules, but, if we can manage, we should really follow worldwide type of compliance. And, I'm not trying to sound like I am kissing the compliance department's behinds, but at the same time is that it's in the customer's best interest. And when you're looking out for your customers, then you're building trust with them. Then you're building safety and security and a longer standing relationship where they aren't avoiding you because you sold their data.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And the kind of the general rule of thumb from the data perspective is you need to meet the most stringent compliance regulation that you can, right? Not even if you're not required to. So, for example, right, CCPA, you brought that up. Even if you don't have to meet CCPA requirements, why not try to get to that level such that when that kind of compliance is enacted in your state, region, country, what have you, you're ready to go versus being kind of behind, right? Kind of behind the eight ball, so to speak. That's on the data front. Now, on the technology front, some very recent research that SAS has done highlights some interesting things that I'd love to share with you. So, we looked at the use of emerging technologies in marketing, specifically generative AI, right? So, how are marketers using generative AI? And what we found was that 85% of the 300 marketers that were surveyed in this research report that we did, 85% of the marketing personas say that they use generative AI daily, right? 81% in IT, 75% in finance, and then kind of it goes across the other departments of the organization. So the majority of people are using generative AI daily, right? And whether that's in development or production, we didn't get into that level of detail, but I imagine that the majority of it is to support them in doing their day-to-day activities versus actually, sending out genAI, stuff in production. But the point I make is while we've got so many people using generative AI, we then asked from a compliance perspective, okay, how many organizations, how many of your organizations have a well-established governance framework? 7%. How many of your organizations provide high level of training around Gen AI governance and monitoring? 5%. How many of your organizations are fully prepared to comply with generative AI regulations once they come online? 9%. So the point is, major gap, huge gap between where brands should be and where they are, right, with the usage of technology, right? And what happens, we all know what happens when you use generative AI and it's not checked, right? Or you don't have that governance and compliance in place. Bad things can happen. And it's not only generative AI, right? It's AI as well. I mean, we've seen instances of companies like I think Waymo is a good example, right? A self-driving autonomous car company in San Francisco. They've had some issues. You've probably heard about those. So really testing and making sure that you've got those compliance frameworks and processes in place from a data and technology perspective is just so important today.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I laugh at Waymo because it's such a good idea, but man, if your car isn't driving because someone put like a picture of something and it confused the algorithm, then that's a little scary. That it's a car. There's there
Yeah.
it's another example of how AI can upend established agencies, like within the government, right? Does the Waymo have to get a driver's license? Did it pass the driver's test? Did it drive, like all these questions that humans and the standard that humans are held to, are we holding AI to the same standard? And what is that standard deviation of acceptable of acceptable like mistakes?
Right.
Um, so, I think that as an organization, coming back to your point about how they don't have established monitoring, they don't have established training or understanding, is that questions like, what is the acceptable amount of being wrong? Is it, does it need to be better than a human or worse than a human? And what type of human? A 3-year-old? Uh, like
Right.
where are we drawing these lines? And those are
Right.
answers that we need to have. Um, but, one of the ones very early on that I think is being solved for, that I've seen marketing saying that it's solved for, whether or not that's true is a different story, is that protection of the data that you're asking of the generative AI, like the prompt stuff. So, um, I saw a company say that they can take your outline and then put it into a PowerPoint
Hmm. Hmm.
and do that within the data like infrastructure so that it's not being exposed outside of your organization within the boundary. So things like boundaries and keeping instances private to that instance is very huge in this. Do you think that where of those things where there was a low percent, which one do you think companies should attack first?
Yeah, I think that I think it's really looking at kind of a framework, right? Because once you create that framework, right, for the usage of generative AI, I think you can then, drill into that and create kind of supporting processes within that framework, right? So it's things like, what are the intended use cases of generative AI? How are we going to use generative AI in the organization? And how are we not going to use it? Yeah, exactly as you said, what are the boundaries, right? What are the ethical guidelines? What's too biased? What's too unfair, right? What's too opaque versus being completely transparent with how we're using these things, right? Where's the accountability, right? So I think ethics is a big piece. How are we complying, right? From a generative AI perspective, how are we handling data to ensure compliance? Are we gaining user consent to be, to use generative AI to interact with them, right? I mean, we've already heard that people have found out, that their chatbot experience was they thought it was a human. It was assigned a human name. There was a human avatar beside the person, right? But it was all machine, right? And it was giving incorrect answers and frustrating consumers that continually had to ask the same kind of questions. So I think that's important as well. I think that you know how do you protect the data that a generative AI system uses, right? Or any really emerging technology system, right? Where are the security measures? What are they? How do you lock down usage so that only certain members of an organization can use it, right? It doesn't get into the wrong hands. How are you adhering to law regulations? How are you testing and validating the accuracy of generative AI outputs, and really all of these AI related outputs, not just generative AI. But I think that to your point, or to your question, I should say, once you've got that framework in place, you can then look at the training, the processes, all of the other things that are needed. But I think that you know a lot of brands aren't even they're not even there. They're not even thinking about that yet. And I think it's a race. We've already seen that it's a race from a, a regulatory perspective and a governmental perspective to establish these regulations, whereas brands are kind of falling behind and trying to catch up with what government agencies are doing. So I think there's I think there's a lot of opportunity to really kind of scale back, I would say, some of the generative AI hype, um, focus on what's needed at a foundational level, and then start building the structure, right? And I think that's kind of where we are today. I think we're seeing that through a lot of the research that's coming out, right? Gartner's hype cycle, Gen AI is fully placed in the trough of disillusionment, right? Which is overhyped expectations, not delivering the value, too cost and resource intensive currently. So I think there's certainly some work to do there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as you were talking, what went through my head was, are the people at the top, are they informed, and who is informing them so that they can know that these are things that they need to solve for? Or are they delegating that and then it's, into the vapor? As someone who's looked for, like actively searched for generative AI, like higher ed, extended ed, things that maybe your CMO would say, "Hey, CMO, go do this thing by MIT. Go do this thing by Chicago Booth. Go do this, that, or Berkeley has something. Go take this course. It's like 10 weeks. We need you to know this." Um, and those, while great, and I'm not insulting anything at all. There's huge value in sending your leadership to those things. They're always one step behind because that's how the premise of it is. Like, it's got to exist. It's got to be one step behind so that it can be formalized into a course and then pushed live on their end. And
Mhm.
so, really trying to find a way to enable leadership to be at the forefront of what's actually happening instead of the science fiction says AI is going to be like Star Trek and
Right.
like, a computer where, what's this, that, it's not there yet. That was a TV show, guys. Like, it's not
Right.
reality.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there just about technology in general.
Yeah.
I think that, again, going back to trust, right? You've got to find a trusted source, whether it's a vendor, whether it's academia, whether it's a colleague or that sort of thing, to really give these leaders the information that they need. Like, how do I really need to be using generative AI? How much of my time and budget does it really need to be consuming? What's the right mix, right? And one of the questions that I talk about a lot is, are we over indexing on generative AI and as a result neglecting traditional AI, right? Traditional AI can do so many amazing things, right? And traditional AI, in my opinion, is frankly better than generative AI because traditional AI can solve a problem. Generative AI does probabilistic summarization, right? And so, at least now, currently, I think we'll get to the point where it will be able to do more. But as we stand today, I think traditional or classic AI, as we like to call it, just has more to offer than generative AI does. I think generative AI, as it's being positioned as a supporting actor, as a assistant, things like that. I think that's great, and I think that's certainly helpful. But I don't think that we should over-index too far on generative AI, and I think a lot of other people would agree with me on that point.
Yeah, and I really like that you called out the separation of the two and what their uses are. And I don't want to chase the rabbit hole of, building in-house, building your own LLM or your own thing in-house first using a vendor. I don't want to chase that. I do, but I don't. But instead,
Mhm,
I'm going to call out something that you mentioned earlier about the customer who was interfacing with a chatbot and how they thought it was a human and how that made them feel once they found out. And how there's so many times where customers have a preference. They have a big preference and
mhm,
they care a lot. And they want to know that their preference is heard and respected and that they have that choice.
mhm,
And so when we're looking at things like whether it's an ATS system or a chatbot or all these things, I think that the ethical use and the guardianship and the stewardship really comes to how are we dealing with our customers and in coming back to that execution, that in production kind of place too, is that none of these things are completely separate. Whether it's the internal culture and priorities and frameworks for approval for how to use it, all the way to some small department was like, yeah, we're going to do this thing. It's really cool. And then
mhm.
now you've got government fines, you've got pissed off customers, you've got a whole mess. So what are some use cases where you're like, do this, not that, as far as as far as AI? Like something small and digestible that if someone were listening, they could like walk away and be like, okay, check. I was thinking about that wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about finding the right mix, right? I think that you can use a variety of technologies in combination to accomplish a lot of great things. I think that obviously testing and learning is probably key. Test out the processes, the technology, the data inputs, the data outputs. Do it in a development environment, please, not a production environment. Please make sure that things are working properly, they are accurate, they are not biased, they are fair to all audiences involved, before things get sent out. I think um, approvals and handoffs and workflows and multi instead of multi-factor authentication, multi-factor approvals, right? Make sure that not just one person is looking at a lot of the work that's being done. And make sure people are looking at it, period, right? I mean, I think there's some cases where things have been sent out into the wild, without the technology being checked, and we've seen bad things happen as a result of that. So I think that the use cases need to have that nice mix of you know, classic AI, some generative AI, some a lot of data privacy and governance, mixed in there, and then check those customer journeys and those activations. Make sure that they're you know they're proper, they're set up correctly, right? And I think there's a lot of different ways that you can do that, whether it's you know looking at and testing, holdout control groups or sub segments or what have you. Just making sure that you're getting what's expected to come from, a use case like a next best action or offer or product recommendation or some sort of even customer journey orchestration or optimization as well. Just make sure that everything's working nicely and in harmony. So
Yeah.
that would be my kind of guidance there.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that you mentioned develop versus prod, right? Don't push it all the way live to customers until you know that it's not going to be like a horrible thing. And then the control groups and the sub segments, right? That is the part where I think people get so eager and they're so excited. And I love the excitement. Please be excited about the work you do, but make sure that you have a measure for, what variable you're testing against. And so many people are like, "We're testing these 2 variables." Okay, cool. Which one's the control? Which one is the
Mhm,
the status quo? And then you can measure the benefit above that baseline.
mhm.
Um, and that's the scientific method, right? You don't test like 2 wildly different things against each other. You test them versus the control. You test the variables.
Right.
Um, and and I've seen that, and I think we've seen also, I think we've seen that sometimes, whether it's AI or just regular stuff, that people get stuck in an echo chamber within their organization and they
Oh,
push out stuff
absolutely.
that sucks.
Absolutely.
Oh, there's been some major blunders of like advertisements by big companies. And it's because everyone was just like, "Yeah, this is great." And nobody was like, "Dude, don't do that. Don't do that. You're gonna make people upset."
That's right.
And you need to
That's
have
right.
those people that you enable to say no.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite kind of sayings that I heard in grad school that I hadn't heard before grad school was, one of my professors said, "You don't know what you don't know," right? And
Mhm.
so I think that's what applies here, right? Marketers get kind of siloed in the group think inside of their organizations, and it's you don't know that this stinks because every other marketer in your organization is telling you that it looks good just because you've always had the best idea in the organization. Have you talked to anybody outside of your organization to see if this is actually worth sending out? So yeah, I am a full subscriber to the philosophy of you don't know what you don't know. Test, learn, ask other people that you might not normally interface with to get some honest, constructive criticism and feedback.
Yeah, and this is a great place where you could have a customer advisory board or voluntary beta testers or like get that sample from the customers, because they aren't the ones that are marketers being like, oh, we're so good at marketing. And like, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe the I love the you don't know what you don't know. And I love the concept of checking your ego at the door and being like, not every idea I have is a good one. You
Yeah.
need to embrace that and hold it like tight to your chest. Not every idea you have is a good one, and you got to be okay with that.
We've seen the downfall of a lot of organizations, right? Because there's just a bunch of yes men and women there that were telling the leader that every idea they have is great. And bad things have happened over and over again in history because of that. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and that's in a climate where there's been a lot of reduction in workforce, that can be
Mhm.
hard. And so I think that comes once again back to leadership and back to the way that the organization is run to enable people to have differing opinions
Yep.
respectfully.
Right.
um all right, I've got a couple questions left. We're going to go with the future of marketing.
Okay.
Where is the future of marketing going, and where do you think it should go? Because that's not always the same.
Wow, that is a big, broad question that we could go on and on for hours. I feel like. Where should marketing go? I think marketing needs to take less of a brand angle and more of a consumer angle, right? So I think that marketers and people that are working in marketing need to take that voice of the customer into account even more so than they do today, right? What do customers really want? Like you think you know what to create and what they want, but do you really know? Can you really determine that? You know, do the research to be able to do that, right? To make those calls and decisions and activate those programs accordingly. Because I think that, you know, as more and more software becomes commoditized, as more and more kind of marketing techniques become commoditized, I think that at the end of the day, the brands that are going to win are going to be the ones that are, the most empathetic when it comes to customers, right? If they don't want to talk, back to our example, if they don't want to talk to a automated chatbot, then spend the money to make everyone that's interfacing with your customers on your website for support an actual human, and see what the impacts are to that. Trial it out. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But I think the future of marketing is going to become more consumer empathetic.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a guiding principle of this entire podcast, is that it has to start with the customers. Um, and we've all been invited to webinars we didn't want to go to. We've all, like we've all been subjected to something that was gated, that like we're like, why do you even need my email? I'm gonna put no email at no email. You know, and really having that reflection of, is this what my customer finds useful, valuable? Does it build delight?
Right, right.
All right. Another huge whale of a question. No one's ever really ready for it. What is a question someone should ask you, but they don't? And the way that this can be taken is that, hey, everybody comes to me for X, Y, and Z, but they're really missing the point. That's way too far down the line. They really need to start at the beginning. They need to know ABC. Or it can be taken as, I have this passion. I don't get to talk about it enough. I really am a goat herder, or, whatever it is
Yeah, yeah.
that you really care about, that you just want to talk more about.
Yeah, so I think one of the fun things for me to talk about is the activation component of MarTech, right? So when the actual offer message engagement leaves the channel and hits the consumer, right? What happens then and after that? So that's what I'd like to talk about, and I talk about a lot. The one thing that I don't talk about, well, I should say that I talk about it a lot, but people don't ask me about it a lot. And this might be because I talk about it a lot, is the data aspect. So, as I mentioned, SaaS is a data management analytics company. That is what is at our core. And so, while we have those solution lines on top of that, We're experts in data. We've been doing the data thing for a long time. And I think there's a lot of things happening right now when it comes to data, whether it's third party cookie deprecation, the changes in collection mechanisms on websites, customer data platforms. And, we've heard a lot about what's the new term going to be there. Is it going to be data collaboration platforms? There's new things like walled gardens, exchanges, clean rooms, so forth and so on. And we talk about that stuff a lot, but I don't really have people coming to me and asking me questions about, well, what should I be doing with kind of these technologies, or trying to create this customer profile, or doing, this sort of data movement, or federated data architectures, that sort of thing. Don't get a lot of those questions, and that's a bit concerning. But at the same time, it's not quite as glamorous to talk about, but it's, as we know, if the data is not right, then we've kind of spent the whole podcast talking about this. The data is not right, bad things start happening. So ask about the data. That would be my guidance.
I think that's really fair. As someone who has been a fierce advocate for putting quality data in at the outset, um, that it's a process. It's not just like one stop. It's not just a picture. It's a process. It's where
Mhm,
does that flow go? Where does it happen? What is it connected to? Should it be connected like that? How are you
mhm,
validating or deduplicating, or how are you doing the things that you're going to do with it? And further on to the more sophisticated things that you mentioned, right? It's a lot more than just, oh, there's two Johns. Oh, okay. And
yeah,
it those kind of deeper questions, I agree with you. They're very, very monumental to the output, to the end result. And
right,
if you aren't answering for those, at some point it's gonna bite you. It's gonna break.
right. No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think, yeah, don't,
Don't sleep on it.
well, yeah, I was going to add kind of one thing onto this, which is, when I talk about MarTech, right, I talk about three layers. I talk about the data, the insight, which is the analytics, and then the activation, which is all the channels that the offers and messages go out to across the top. Three-step process, right? Data, insight, action. I talk about the action. Like I said, everyone wants to talk about the action, but no one wants to talk about the data, and not many people want to talk about the insight either, right? So I think there's a lot still. There's a lot of work still to do, for brands that are looking to really start heavily infusing analytics into a lot of their activation work. Um, some brands are good at it, few brands. The majority of brands aren't really doing a lot of analytic work within their kind of customer journey creation, at all. And so I think that, that would be something else that I wish we could talk about a little bit more. And I wish brands were a little further along, but I think they'll get there as kind of, these AI technologies and analytic technologies become more kind of democratized. I think more brands are going to have to start using them, because of the data changes that are happening and that sort of thing. So I would add that to the list as well. But I'll stop there. We won't. I won't talk about any more about what I wish people would ask me. So
No, I mean, I think this is great, and you're right. People really do need to catch on to this, and I can think of two major consumer product good companies that are using AI LLMs in their data to then activate in a very meaningful, m- big, big way that's working. And this was, some of their seminars that they had at the Routers conference earlier,
mhm.
were Strategic West, like earlier this year, here in Los Angeles. And guys, B2B, if they don't start jumping on the B2C bandwagon, they are gonna be, oof. People
Mhm.
expect it. It's an entry level benchmark. It's not a negotiable thing. Like, oh well, we're so great because our journey is longer. No, people want you to treat them the way that they expect to be treated.
Right. Full
Back to your
stop.
point.
Yep.
Awesome. If people want to get a hold of you or they do want to ask you more about your favorite question or lack of being questioned about it. What is the best
Yeah.
way for people to find you?
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn. Jonathan Moran is the name there. So just search Jonathan Moran SaaS and I'll pop right up there. So you can add me on LinkedIn. And one other thing I will mention, Leanne, is the research report that I referenced earlier. If viewers want to take a look at that research report, just go to sas.com/genAI dash marketing, right? All one kind of phrase there. sas.com/genAI dash marketing. They'll find the research report that, if they're interested in seeing how generative AI is being used inside of marketing organizations. So wanted to cite my work there. So
No, I appreciate it. We can also include the link. I'll update the show notes later to include the link for anyone that wants to find it. I would also like to encourage you that if you are looking for John here on LinkedIn, there are two John Morans. So you really want to include SAS. That is the company. That will help you to find the correct one if you are only going to be listening to this later on audio and you aren't seeing the, the correct image of the individual.
that's right.
My name's Leanne. If you want to get a hold of me, it's info@Markigy, MarkiGy.com. And thank you for listening.
Thanks, Leanne. It's great to be on with you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.